Um, Today's meeting is in a Zoom format because we are hoping that you will actively participate. And we are also, of course, hoping that you will turn your camera on so our presenter can see you. Today's Q&A, whether or not you're joining via Zoom or Hoover, you can submit questions in Hoover. That's where we will be monitoring the chat, so thank you for that. As a reminder, you can enable closed captioning if needed at any time on the bottom of your Zoom. And yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Cindy Hill now, and she is going to talk more about mentoring parents and families of first-gen students. So thank you.
Thanks, Tanya. So welcome everyone, and thanks for joining me for this conversation this afternoon about parents and families of first-gen students. I have to tell you, I suppose I should start with introducing myself. First and foremost, I'm Cindy Hill. I'm the director of the Penn State Parents Program. And if you're not familiar with our office is located at University Park. We primarily support the parents and families of University Park students through communications. So we support, we communicate, we educate, right? And we provide one-on-one support when necessary. We also provide some support to some of the campuses. So some of our publications and those kinds of things, we help the campuses. We're also the data stewards for all parent data at Penn State. We're a very small but mighty office located in the Bank of America building on campus in the Career Services building. So couple of things before we really get started on in the conversation is I want to, in the presentation, I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes max. And then I really want to have everyone turn their cameras on and do some brainstorming. I want to hear what you all are doing. So think about that as I go through sort of my quick presentations. But there is a poll. There are 2 questions in the poll. So if you haven't had a chance to answer those, if you would please do that, I would appreciate that. And then I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to look at the poll. And I'm going to share a quote as you all are finishing up the poll that really framed my conversation. It's by 2 researchers that I have a lot of respect for, and I think they're doing some really great research out there, especially for non-traditional families. So you'll see me and I'll reference them quite a bit. I will tell you at the end of the presentation, I have a slide with all of my references, so don't feel like you have to write any of this stuff down, and I will share my slides, so you can do that. So I'm going to read this whole quote. I didn't put the whole quote on the slide, but it is long. So this is from Kiama and Harper, who do a lot of research with families in higher education. And they have a publication from 2018 called The Relationship Between College Students and Their Families, which is an excellent publication. And what they share in their publication is that first-generation college students receive far less emotional, informational, and financial support from their parents than continuing generational students. This does not mean that parents and family members do not care or do not want to support their students, right? But the challenge is that families of first-generation college students may have misinformation about involvement options or might be unsure of how to find resources to help their students' success. They may be unaware of offices like mine, right? That the college or university has a parent or family office whose mission is to offer resources, support, and involvement opportunities for families. Additionally, families of first-generation college students sometimes find the college environment intimidating. So it's important to ensure parents of first-generation students have a really good foundation of knowledge regarding how to complete the financial aid process, right? The differences between tuition, fees, and other costs that their students might encounter, how to pay the bill, how to access that information, right? Options for payment plans, the benefits of living on campus. It's also helpful as an institution to review the differences in expectations and rigor of the college environment so parents and family members have an understanding of what the demands that their students are under as they start, especially their first year of college. Okay, so that's sort of the framing of my conversation, but what I'm going to do now is share the poll. 2 quick questions. The first question, and I will share this with you, is working with families part of your job description? Or is it something you just do? I actually found it really interesting. It's relatively even, right? I mean, I'm not a statistician, but a significant number of yeses and a lot of no, but I do it anyways, right? Because that's just sort of part of the package anymore, that when college students come, they're bringing their families to campus. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, let me find the other I have so much stuff going on at my screen that I can't get to the X button. All right, well, it's not going to unshare it. Are you all seeing that, the poll results? Well, it says that I'm sharing it.
We are not.
Okay, thank you. And I have no idea how to get to the next question because Whova is all locked up. All right. I'm going to skip the next question because I don't want to delay this and I don't know how to make this share. Oh, here we go. The next poll, I'm not sure how to share this, but I will share the results. I just wanted to know how long folks had been in higher education. And so we had 16% of our poll respondents, 0 to 2 years. So new professionals, right? About 5%, 3 to 5 years, and then 79%, 5+ years. So lots of experience around the table and at this conference. And I think that that's really important. Okay, so back to the presentation. Let's talk a little bit about the goals for today's presentation. I'm going to talk just briefly about the history of parents and families in higher education. I'm going to talk about parents and families at Penn State, how we define the family, first-gen student and family, a little bit about first-gen families and why should we care? Why do we care about families, right? I'm going to touch upon involvement versus engagement and some language and terminology that we are using or may not be using. And then you all will come in, and that's when we start talking about barriers or roadblocks for families, best practices, right? How can we pull together, come up with some ideas and develop some best practices? There are some out there, and I'll get the conversation started with some of the best practices out there, but I really want to see how this is working at Penn State on our campuses and such. So, all right. So a little brief history of parents and families in higher education. So I have 5 things that really has helped evolve the relationship that families have had with institution. And it goes all the way back to the early 1900s when at the university university in Kentucky, Berea College, was sued by a restaurant owner downtown. And the restaurant owner sued the university because the university said, students, you are not allowed to go downtown and eat at Mr. Gott's restaurant. And because they provided dining and it was not safe, they needed to stay on campus, right? So the restaurant owner sued the university and said, you can't tell your students where they can or cannot eat. Well, the university won. And the university won because of in loco parentis, which means in place of the parent. And the Kentucky Court of Appeals upheld the decision by saying that the university was operating in the best interest of their students in place of their parents. So that was the initial sort of decision from a legal standpoint of a relationship between universities and families. So when families were sending their students to college, the colleges were then taking over sort of the parental role of those college students. And then relationships, so fast forward to the 1960s, right? And we have civil unrest and lots of protests and those kinds of things. And in 1961, there's a landmark case against the Alabama Board of Education. There were 6 students at the Alabama State College, now the Alabama State University, who expelled 6 of their Black students who had participated in a civil rights demonstration. And the college said, we acted in loco parentis and expelled the students without cause because we are operating under the assumption that we are keeping our students safe like a parent, and we can do that. Well, one of the students sued the university and the State Board of Education, and they won. And what the state of Alabama, or what the decision was, that that universities cannot expel students without due process. And that changed the relationship that students and families had with their institution, right? It no longer was in loco parentis. Now we're talking about that the university has a responsibility to the students and not necessarily to the parents. And then we're getting into more recent history, some of which we're still operating under, so should be really familiar. One is FERPA, 1974, right, which gives rights to privacy of student information to the students when they transition to institution of higher ed. I'm sure we're all familiar with that, so I'm not going to really go into FERPA. But two that you might not think about. One is No Child Left Behind. Who remembers that in the early 2000s, right? Second President George Bush. And basically, what they said was, we're going to support education. We're going to make education stronger. And to do that, parental involvement is important, right? So we want schools, this is from the Federal Department of Education, we want schools to encourage that parents are full partners in their students' education, right? And they're going to math stations and field trips, and they're in the schools and they're supporting the schools, right? So that started in the early 2000s. Well, then those students grew up, as they do, and they went to college. And colleges said this: no, that's really nice that you were involved in your students' K through 12 education, but we don't want you. Your students are adults, and we don't want you. FERPA protects us. We don't have to tell you anything. And parents' response was, oh yeah, that's not going to work for me, right? You told me that education is better when I'm involved, and I'm involved, and I'm going to continue to be involved. And so there's an evolution of the way universities frame their relationships with colleges and institutions, or with parents and families, with No Child Left Behind. And then I think we can't talk about the way families are engaged with a university and their students without talking about technology. So Richard Mullendorf, for those of you who are into transition and understanding how students transition to college, he refers to the cell phone as the longest umbilical cord in history, right? And I love that quote, because we know, for those of you, especially our academic advisors and meeting one-on-one with students, we know that students are in contact with their parents and family members on a regular, if not daily basis, right? But we also had Facebook started in 2006, the first smartphones, 2007. And then there's GPS tracking and Life 360, right? There's all these ways that families are staying connected to their young adults, which is impacting the relationship that universities have with parents and families. So I'm going to quickly go through the next slide. So why are parents involved, right? So No Child Left Behind is the first one. Parents are providing significant financial support, right? This is sometimes the largest investment that a family member has, second to maybe the home that they live in, right? And when you make an investment, you want to know what your return on your investment is. And so they're staying a little bit closer, right? Their concerns about health and safety. Parents often have more affinity for their students' institution than their own. And that is really strong at Penn State, that, you know, their students come to Penn State, do all these really great things, and parents really want to feel a part of it. Of course, technology, and then students want their families to be involved at a different level. There's a generational trend with our Gen Z students who, you know, are spending more time with their families and really want to include their families in their college experience. So some recent trends, and I put recent in quotes because this is starting to not be so recent, but we have increased the formalized parent and family services at institutions nationwide. In fact, most institutions now have a parent or family office similar to what we have at Penn State. There's an increase of parental involvement research and literature out there, and some studies that are showing the impact of parent relationships with our students, right? There's an emphasis on developing positive relationships with families as a way to support students, because what we're finding is that when a parent is appropriately engaged, student success increases. So appropriately being the key word, right? And so what we need to do is define our relationship with our families. And most institutions have established the philosophy of working with parents as key stakeholders, right? But we need to provide a gateway or a door for parents to enter the institution. And it can't be the academic advising office, and it can't be the professor's office, right? The faculty member's office, but it can be the parent and family program. So parents and families at Penn State. So there's just some screenshots of some logos and publications on the screen. We view parents as partners, right? We have an office that's dedicated to their support. That's my office. We provide significant amount of communications which share opportunities, resources, and just what's going on campus, right? Parents can go to our website. They get regular emails from our office. They can connect with us on social media. So there's lots of different ways for parents to connect with our office, right? We also provide support to the campuses, which I mentioned at the beginning. We also provide engagement opportunities for families. So families can become volunteers for Penn State. if they're willing and interested in investing a little bit more, they can come and be a member of our parent council, which is an advisory board that really helps share the Penn State parent experience with us, or family experience with us. And they also help out with our events, which is key for the work that we do. And then we provide one-on-one support, right? If a student hits a bump in the road and a family member doesn't know who to turn to, they can start with us and we can get them started. One of the really great parts of my job is to coordinate and manage this volunteer parents council and parent ambassadors. And the student and mom on the screen is a Penn State student. That's Lauren, and her mom, Rita. And Rita is on our parents council, and Lauren is a first generation student. And Lauren's also a volunteer in our office. And we are able to provide support to Rita to remove some barriers for her to participate because of some additional grant money and scholarship money that I have, that I can help her travel to Penn State and bring her voice as a first generation parent of a first generation college student. And so that's been really great. The definition that you see on the screen is Penn State's definition of a first gen student. And so the parents of those students, like you see on the screen, Rita. So why do we care? Like, who cares if it's a first generation student or not, right? Well, we care because of the students, right? And there's a quote on the screen. This was from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Just last week, they did a really great series of profiling first gen students. And this is Selena Bush. And I love this quote that she talks about the important role that her grandmother played in her continuing her education. And she didn't care, grandma didn't care whether it took 4 years or 20 years, but she was there to support Selena. And I just think that that's really a nice story. And it really is similar to what we are seeing and what we heard this morning, right? I listened to the panel of the first gen advocates, and then of course the wonderful keynote speaker both this morning and this afternoon at lunch. So why else do we care? Well, we care because of the research out there, right? And they're supporting data. So first of all, first gen students and families, especially families, are underrepresented in research. So we need to do some more research. And that's the great work that Kiama and Harper are doing, which I think is really important, right? Some of the quotes, and this is a little different than what we saw this morning, that only 24% of first gen students earn a bachelor's degree compared to 68% of students who have parents with college degrees, right? We talked about the lack of knowledge to navigate and support, right? All of that at the beginning. But we also, there's a few studies out there, right? There's a study with Shoup, Gagne, and Koo, who found out that involved parents supported certain success areas of students, right? Practical competence, personal and social development, and general education outcomes. That's really important because there's some data that's saying parents and families can support student success, right? And we also know that parents can help ease that first gen student transition to college. So, how many have heard of helicopter parents, right? Okay, well, we're kind of getting away from this term, and I give credit back to Kiama and Harper on this, right? And I try not to use the word helicopter parents because it's misinterpreting why parents are reaching out, right? Parents are reaching out, and I always say, I call it love, care, and concern, right? They love the student, they care about their student, and they're concerned about a particular issue. So when we approach our work from the love, care, and concern versus a helicopter parent, we're more likely to support the parent compassionately than to be defensive in the help that they're asking for, the questions that they're asking. But one thing that I'm working on, some of the language that I'm using, is how we engage parents, right? We tend to use the word involvement, right? But Kiama and Harper recommend that we get away from the word involvement and focus on the word engagement because it's a much more inclusive term, right? So involvement sort of says, here are the specific things that you do, right? And this is reinforced with No Child Left Behind, right? But you participate with events and you help with homework and you join the parent-teacher association. But it's a bit of a deficit model, right? Because if you don't have the cultural capital or the experience, you're not able to participate at that level, right? But when we look at it from an engagement standpoint, it's a little bit more inclusive of parents' orientation to the world and how that frames the things that they do, right? So maybe showing up on campus to volunteer is not the way they're able to support their student, but there are so many other ways that they can support their students' educational journeys, right? It can be dinner table conversations, expectations and cultural beliefs of success as an adult, right? And it's more of a strength-based reciprocal model between students and their families, right? So we're working hard in our office to start using the term engagement over involvement. So because we don't want to tag on any unrealistic expectations to our parent population. Okay. I'm watching the time because I want to make sure we have time to talk. I want to talk a little bit about barriers to family engagement, right? So we tend to assume, again, back to that involvement versus engagement conversation, we tend to assume that if a parent is not engaging or involving themselves, it's either a lack of interest, willingness, or knowledge, right? So what can we do to not assume those things and to remove barriers to make things easier for families, right? So first and foremost, I am sure you've all heard of the hidden curriculum at college, right? So I'm not going to go through that, but college, navigating that curriculum requires families to intuit and make some assumptions about what's happening on campus. And that's an extremely challenging position for families to be in. Certain terminology creates a hesitancy for parents, right? So everyone's heard of a helicopter parent. So they don't want to be a helicopter parent. Therefore, I'm not going to reach out and ask a question, even though it's a really important question, because maybe if I don't ask the question, we're not going to figure out why my student's going to lose a student aid, right? So we need to destigmatize the asking for help, right? Too often, the first interaction between an institution and a family is about financial information, often complicated, that involves like FAFSA verification, right? How many people would love that to be your very first interaction with the institution your student is attending, right? Congratulations, we've welcomed your student. You're going to owe us tens of thousands of dollars. And by the way, could you provide us with all of this information that's relatively complicated? And we're not going to actually tell you why. We're just going to say the federal government requires us to do this, right? So we need to think about how we're framing those conversations. We need to let parents know that there are ways to engage with the institution that don't require a visit to campus. We need to think about program fees and costs, right? So just for example, for Parents and Families Weekend at Penn State, we are considering for the first time ever a registration fee. Now, the registration fee that we are considering is $25 for the family, so it is not a significant fee. But given that hotel rooms are very costly and families are already traveling, we are building into our budget the opportunity to provide grants to families of students who identify as low income or Pell eligible. So we can remove that barrier so their family can come, right? Again, help-seeking behaviors, we need to normalize this. It's important for families to understand that pressures from home can be really challenging for students. So if your family has a family dinner every Sunday night and there's this expectation that your student's going away to college, but they're still going to come home to Sunday night dinner or the birthday celebration or to watch their younger sibling while parents are otherwise occupied, that puts a lot of pressure on our students. And so we need to let families know that they need to try and think about that. And then, just that feeling of being overlooked and shut out. We have lots and lots of families who have lots of experience in college and sending students to college, and they treat universities somewhat like a department store, right? I want good customer service, and they know exactly what to ask for. And we forget that not everybody knows what to ask for, and that customer approach is not necessarily the right approach for our first generation families. So I'm going to pause here, and this is your part of the presentation. What are some other barriers? And I'm going to take notes because I'm very excited to hear what else the rest of you all are doing. All right, you can raise your hand or you can just unmute your mic and share other barriers. I'm going to expand my screen so I can see, well, I can't see too many faces, but what are other barriers? All right, Alexa.
Sorry, trying to find my unmute button here. But I think one of the things that I tend to see, so obviously there's intersectionality when we're talking about first generation college student. They are not one type of student. And in my role, I'm at the Berks campus and I coordinate a retention program. And a lot of my students are first generation, but they also come from low income backgrounds, which you talked about. And some of them are kind of in that process of becoming US citizens. And so there's some challenges in terms of when we're asking for all these really critical documentation for financial aid processes and things like that, where there's sometimes a level of discomfort or even distrust with the family in supplying those documentations, which you kind of alluded to earlier. I also feel like I appreciated the way that you defined engagement and made it more broad. And I think that sometimes the challenge for some families is they don't feel like they fit, right? Are they going to be wearing the right clothes? Are they going to say the right thing? And are they going to embarrass their student?
Oh, yes, they are going to embarrass their student because all parents embarrass their student.
And so I think that that's an additional barrier. And I was actually going to ask, I was curious about that engagement opportunity that you've created with the student and the mother that you shared the example of, because I do see that where we have our students coming to campus for things like new student orientations and award ceremonies where families are invited, but their families don't show up, maybe because of work schedules, but sometimes because they don't feel like they belong in that environment. So those are just long-winded two examples.
Oh, I think it's awesome. One thing, Alexa, that we've been trying to do, we create the Parents and Families Guide, and we create a version of it for the campuses as well. And we try, and so we work really hard on language. We grade it from a readability score, and we give it a readability score of the 10th grade or lower. It's slowly, because we work at a university, we're proud of our big words, right? But not in the family realm. We need to, because sometimes English isn't their first language. Right? And so we need to be conscientious of that. The other thing that we're doing is defining things a little bit more, right? What's a bursar? Like seriously, right? We all know it in Hamilton, but that's it, right? So, so defining it. So we have a page in our guide called Talk Like a Penn Stater, like what's a hub, right? What's the loop? And because students are going to, text their parents and say, hey, I'm going to take the loop to the hub because I have to go to Thon. And the parents are going to go, you're doing what? So anyway, helping them with the language of the campus is important as well.
Oh, I appreciate that. I just wanted to add, so on our campus, we started an initiative in 2020. It's called the Lines Roar newsletter. And I have the pleasure of helping to craft those messages that go into the newsletter. And one of the big initiatives that I've been pushing for is to make these terminologies more digestible for our students. So for example, in our April newsletter, I just did a write-up of late drop versus withdrawal. Why might a student pursue a late drop over withdrawal, and what is the process? What kind of questions should they be asking in advance so that they understand these processes? Because they might have a peer who says, oh, you're failing that class, go ahead and late drop. And they don't know what that means, right? And sometimes they're embarrassed to say, what exactly is that? And how do I do it? So then we create a stall story, which is kind of like a condensed version of that, where we highlight kind of just the general pieces, but same kind of initiative where we're just making the language and the communications friendlier and more inclusive.
I love that. Okay, anybody else want to share barriers? As you might imagine, the next thing we're going to talk about are best practices, so maybe that'll be more fun. So let me go back. So some of these best practices we've already touched upon, right? But in the CAS standards, right, we're all familiar with CAS standards. there is a directive about student affairs, which is where my office is situated, right? That parent and family programs must be reflective of the developmental and demographic profiles of the student population served, right? That's why Rita is on my parents' council, because we have first generation single parent families who send their students to Penn State, and I want her voice, right? That's really important. And she's willing to share that story. That's why she joined the council, right? We talked about inclusive language, right? We need to educate parents and families about the resources that are available and let them know that they are welcome to take advantage of those resources, right? We need to leverage Gen Z's tendencies of increased levels of communications with and involvement with their families to help both parties, right? The student and the family to understand that language. So Alexa talked about explaining late drop versus withdrawal to her students, right? Wouldn't it be great if I explained that to families, right? So I just think we need to do that, right? Because we know that there's this increased connection between parents and families. We know that communicating with parents and families is one way to create engagement opportunities, right? And we know that an engaged parent or family can help with student success. So creating communications that engages families. We can offer assistance to attend events or visit campus, right? That may look different at different campuses, but like I said, we're looking at ways to provide a grant so families, that $25 is not going to be a barrier to attending Parents and Families Weekend. Parents and families need to be aware that it's okay to ask for help. It just have to ask the right person, right? So that would be my office in the most part, right? We need to talk about whether or not we need communications in different languages. I had my very first phone call. I've been doing this for 8 years. I had my very first phone call on Monday from a mom from Florida who only speaks Spanish. I speak what I call travel Spanish, right? So I can book a hotel, I can order in a restaurant, I can find the library and the bathroom. That does not help me out in my work when I'm trying to help a family member, right? So I was able to have a very quick conversation with this mom. I got her name and I got her phone number and I told her that help was coming. So, you know, we translate some of our materials, but this was the first time I was challenged with a conversation in Spanish with a family member. And I have since pulled the Penn State resources together and we are meeting the needs of this family, right? Thinking about your backgrounds, you know, if you are a first gen student yourself, the story that you might be able to tell of what it's like, what it was like for you, right? Inviting first gen staff and families who've been through all this, right, to sit on a panel. I always think about ways that we might do that with parents and families. I'm not sure Parents and Families Weekend is the right opportunity, and I'm not sure how we would do it at New Student Orientation 40 times, right? There's no way, if we can't get parents here for a weekend, how are we going to get them here for 40 days? But ways that we can maybe better meet the needs of our first gen families at orientation, right? And then let families of first gen students know that they should be proud both of themselves and their students. That this is a really big accomplishment for so many families and they need to be proud, right? And that's where the embarrassment of the student comes. And here's your part. Share your best practices. What else are you all doing out there that you think is worth sharing, worth repeating, and might help your Penn State colleagues? This is where I have to be comfortable with uncomfortable silence, right? You all know when you came here, this was a discussion group, right? All right, Matt, good to see your name. I can't see you.
Hi, Cindy. How are you doing?
I'm good.
One of the things that we do in the College of Ag is we separate the parents and the students during NSO and have a separate conversation with the parents and just try and answer any questions. I really try not to say, hey, are you a parent of a first gen student? But just trying to take some of the questions of all the parents, and the first gen parents start to see, okay, we're not the only ones with these questions. and we have a face in the college of somebody that we can reach out to, and that's really been helpful. I've had great conversations with parents of struggling students that we've been able to help because they're comfortable having their student reach out to me because the parent is comfortable with me. So that's just one of the things that we've been trying to do, is put a face in front of the parents right away.
Thanks, Matt. That's a great idea. I can share a little secret. If we make it our goal to meet the needs of the families of our first generation family of students, we will meet the needs of all of our parents and families. So it's not like we have to do our jobs any differently for different parent populations. Just meet the needs of the families of our first generation students, and then we will meet the needs of everyone. Harriet.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm at the Altoona campus. As you were talking, actually, I thought of a barrier rather than a practice. And that would, in my mind, or my opinion, it would be change of campus issues. So now you have a student who's coming to University Park or some other larger campus, and there's no handoff officially in place. And that includes the family as well.
Yeah, and why? Why does my student have to go to a different campus? I don't understand, right? They can't live at home anymore, right? They're gonna save money. They're not gonna save money, right? There's all sorts of questions that come along with that change of campus process. So you are spot on, Harriet, with that challenge.
Cindy, I'm just going to jump in.
Okay, awesome.
I think I was trying to find my raised hand and I couldn't find it quick enough.
Okay.
So. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. And, I think it was only recently that I learned that with our students who are changing campus, that their advisor information does not populate until very late. And so that is also, I had a few parents reach out more recently, mostly through personal contacts and colleagues, to say, do you know who we can get in touch with? I'm not really sure where they should be going, or which, just who is our point of contact in this transition. And so that kind of put that issue on my radar. And I think for a first generation families, first generation students, that's problematic, that, they don't have that necessarily, kind of go-to person to start to develop a relationship with earlier on. Now, some of them might be more proactive and like reach out to departments and kind of just like talk more generally, which is great, but you have to think that there's a great number of students that are not doing that. They're waiting to be kind of assigned and told who to contact. So just a thought there, and kind of when we're thinking about that transition piece. So again, not a best practice, but something that I think we need to be cognizant of to start building best practices around.
Right. And it's always good to understand the systems that we have to operate within, right? And sometimes we don't have a lot of flexibility in those systems. I don't know about this particular issue, but sometimes that can really be challenging for families and students, quite frankly. All right, I just have another minute. So what I want to do is, we did that. This is super tiny, but just know that I'm going to share my slides. So in case you want to do some reading, this is the resources that I relied on, really have been relying on for many, many years in the work that I do. So they're really great resources. I think anything that Kiama and Harper do are excellent and a little more current. They've been doing their stuff recently, and in fact, they're coming out with a new paper on parent-family engagement. And I'm very excited about that one. So anyway, any other questions?
Yes, Cindy, I just wanted to comment on some best practices. Is some working in the advising space, sometimes helping the student by coaching them about how to have conversations with their families about the expectations their families have of them while they are in college. I've had some students who have to go home every weekend, like Denise just mentioned in the chat. about she was expected to go home at night for dinner on Sundays. We have many families who have that expectation that the school that they're in a college setting is like the same as in high school, which is very different. The rigor is different. The demands are different. Their expectations for extracurricular are different. So coaching the student on how to have those conversations in a respectful, loving way with their family can be very helpful.
Gosh, Sharon, if you could come up with a one-pager to share with all of us about that, wouldn't that be great? All right, well, I'm going to wrap up and thank everybody for joining us. And like I said, I will be sharing this presentation. I appreciate you spending some time with us. And if you come up with other ideas, throw them in the chat and we'll share them later.
Yes, thank you, Cindy, and thank you everybody for attending this great session. We appreciate it. Just a gentle reminder to please complete the session evaluation form, which you can find in Whova. You can either access it by going to the session agenda page and just click on rate session, or you can go on the main survey navigation and just press that button and find your session. So we would really appreciate your thoughts on that presentation. Thank you so much and enjoy the next upcoming sessions.
All right, thank you, everyone.